A billionaire sits alone in a corner booth wearing a stranger's clothes in a restaurant he owns but no longer recognizes. Then a waitress sets down his coffees and slides a folded note under the saucer. Her hands are steady. Her eyes are not 6 words, whispered so quietly the room swallows them whole. I know who you are. They're stealing from you. She walks away. Takes the next table's order. Smiles like nothing happened. But in a back office 30 feet away, a man with a silver watch is already asking questions about the customer in booth 4. He knows things he shouldn't know. A daughter's, a school schedule, a birthday in February. Tonight, there will be an unmarked truck at the loading dock. A typed confession she'll refuse to read, and 2 words sent from a phone at 11:52 that will pull a man out of his car and into the dark. The numbers didn't lie. That was the thing Warren Gideon had learned in 17 years of building restaurants from the ground up. Numbers didn't have moods. They didn't have bad days. They didn't tell you what you wanted to hear because they liked you. They just sat there on the page, flat, patient, waiting for you to stop avoiding them. He had been avoiding the Atlanta report for 11 days. Not consciously. He had read it multiple times. But reading and truly seeing were different things, and somewhere between the quarterly projections and in the customer satisfaction index, his mind kept sliding sideways into the safer territory of his other 46 locations. The ones performing well. The ones that made sense. Atlanta didn't make sense. Revenue down 24%, 8 consecutive months. Customer complaints up 38%. Employee turnover at 69%. 69. He set his espresso down, looked at that number again. In 17 years, he had never seen turnover that high at a location this size. People didn't leave jobs that paid fair wages and offered decent hours unless something was making them leave. Unless someone was making them leave. He had hired consultants, revised the menu, increased the marketing budget. None of it had moved the numbers in any direction that made sense. Which meant the problem wasn't the food, wasn't the foot traffic, wasn't the neighborhood. The problem was inside the building, and he couldn't see it from New York. He pushed back from the desk, walked to the window. Pre-dawn Manhattan. Gray and indifferent, doing what it always did, not caring about his Atlanta numbers, not caring about much of anything except its own relentless forward motion. He thought about Clara. He always ended up thinking about Clara when something was wrong, and he couldn't pin down exactly what. Clara Simmons, 26 years old, waitress at his Raleigh location 4 years ago. She had come to him twice, 2 separate occasions. Said something was wrong at the location. Said she didn't feel safe. He had been in the middle of a merger with a hotel group in Phoenix, a negotiation that had taken 14 months and required every available hour of his attention. He had handed Clara's concern to the regional manager and said, "Handle it." 3 weeks later, Clara had left without notice. 2 weeks after it, he found out why she had left. Found out what the regional manager had actually been doing. Found out that handle it had meant something very different to the person he trusted to handle it. He had arrived too late. He had been too busy. He had trusted the wrong system at the wrong moment, and a young woman had paid for it. He had restructured the Raleigh management within a week. But you couldn't restructure what had already happened. You couldn't return what had already been taken. He lived with that. And standing at his window at 5:40 in the morning, looking at an Atlanta report that didn't add up, he felt the familiar shape of that weight and decided he wasn't going to let it happen again. He opened his laptop, went to the Delta website, found a 6:15 a.m. flight to Atlanta economy seat window. He booked it with the same account he used for everything because it never occurred to him to hide it. He was going to look at his own restaurant, nothing covert about that, except he didn't call his assistant, didn't schedule a formal inspection, didn't send the usual 48-hour advance notice to the local team. He closed the laptop, went to his closet, past the suits, all the way to the back where the ordinary clothes lived, the things he wore when he was just Warren. When he wasn't performing anything. Gray hoodie, dark jeans, work boots that had been Razizoled twice. The boots his assistant kept suggesting he replace, and that he kept not replacing because they fit correctly, and fit correctly was harder to find than it looked. He looked at himself in the mirror, ordinary, unremarkable. A man in his early 40s who could have been anyone, good enough. He picked up the Atlanta report one more time. Read the last line of the summary section, the one his operations analyst had flagged in red. Pattern of decline inconsistent with market conditions. Recommend internal review. Internal review. His own cautious language filtered through his own cautious team, finally landing on the honest word. Something was wrong inside. He was going to go find out what. Renata Holloway had been awake since 4:47, not because of the alarm. The alarm was set for 5:15, and she had stopped needing it 3 weeks ago. Around the same time, her body had decided that sleep past 4:47 was a luxury the current situation didn't permit. She stood at the kitchen window with her first coffee of the morning and watched the street below come slowly into focus. Still dark enough that the streetlights were doing real work. A delivery truck idling at the intersection. A woman in scrubs moving at the pace of someone finishing a night shift rather than starting a day one. Normal things. The city doing what cities did before most people were awake to watch. She made herself focus on them. The truck. The woman in scrubs. The dog that appeared from somewhere, investigated the base of the streetlight with professional thoroughness, and moved on. Ordinary details. She had learned in the past 3 weeks that ordinary details were an anchor. When the inside of your head was carrying the weight of what she was carrying, you needed anchors. On the kitchen counter next to the coffee maker was a small blue notebook, dollar store spiral binding. The kind of thing you bought 12 at a time without thinking about it. She didn't look at it directly. She knew everything in it already. Bria appeared at 5:23. 17 years old, still had sleep in her eyes and her mother's bone structure and absolutely no patience for conversation before orange juice. She poured a glass, drank half of it, standing at the refrigerator, and then she was a functional human being. "Did you sleep?" Bria asked. "I slept." A pause, the specific kind of pause that meant Bria had made a private calculation and decided not to push. "Yet I made oatmeal," Renata said. "I see it." They ate at the small table by the window. Outside, Atlanta was adding light and noise in increscents. The gospel music from the apartment below theirs had started up the same playlist it always was, the kind of volume that suggested genuine conviction rather than consideration for neighbors. Between bites, Bria mentioned the paper she was finishing for AP Social Studies. The topic was bystander behavior. Why people who witnessed injustice chose silence over action. Renata's spoon stopped moving. She set it down quietly. "What did you decide?" she asked, casual voice. The voice she had been practicing. Bria considered it, the way she considered things seriously, before she spoke. "I think people stay quiet because they can't see who's strong enough to stand with them. So the calculation becomes, what's the point of standing alone?" She looked up from her bowl. "And then they feel guilty about that forever, which might actually be worse than the consequence they were afraid of in the first place." Renata looked at her daughter, 17 years old, and she had just described the last 3 weeks of Renata's life with more precision than Renata had managed in any of the conversations she'd had with herself at 4:47 in the morning. "Your grandfather used to say," Renata started. "I know what Grandpa said, then say it." Bria met her eyes. "He said doing the right thing gives you peace, even when it costs you something. Maybe especially then." Her father, James Holloway, security guard at a textile plant in Macon for 22 years. When he discovered that the floor manager was falsifying safety inspection reports to reduce costs, he reported it to the state labor board. The manager was terminated. 40 workers went home to safer conditions. 3 months later, her father was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, completely unrelated to the report, entirely unfair by any measure. The kind of thing that made you want to argue with the universe. But he had said, in those last weeks, that he had no regrets. That the peace of having acted correctly was something that couldn't be taken back even when everything else could. Renata had carried that word like a stone in her pocket ever since. She took it out at moments like this one, turned it over. She picked up the blue notebook from the counter, slipped it into her bag, walked to the door. "Love you," Bria said without looking up from her paper. "Love you more." Factually impossible. Renata almost smiled. The bus was at the corner. She ran for it. Warren's flight landed at 9:22. He took a rideshare from Hartsfield, watching Atlanta come into focus through the window. The city had its own quality of morning light. Warmer than New York. More horizontal somehow, the way sunlight behaved in places without tall buildings to redirect it. He had the driver drop him 4 blocks from the diner instead of 2. He wanted the walk, not for exercise, for information. He stopped at a coffee shop on the corner of Pryor and Mitchell and sat at a window table for 30 minutes with a cup he didn't finish and a clear sightline to the street that would take him to state. Watched who walked past, watched the rhythm of the block. A dry cleaner that had been there long enough that the owner didn't need to unlock the door consciously anymore. The hands did it without instruction. A pharmacy, a barber shop. Good foot traffic for a Tuesday. People with destinations rather than people wandering. Nothing about the block explained the numbers in his report. He left the coffee shop at 10:40, walked the remaining 4 blocks, slowed when the diner came into view. Gideon Diner occupied the corner of State Street. The exterior was exactly as the renovation photos had shown 4 years ago when he'd approved the remodel. Red brick. Original arched windows, cleaned and reglazed. The neon sign, vintage style, the G in Gideon done in a slightly different color from the rest. He had chosen that detail himself, a small reference to the original sign on the building he'd bought. He stood across the street and looked at it for a moment. From the outside, it was everything he had wanted it to be. The kind of place that looked like it belonged to its neighborhood, like it had a story. He crossed the street and went in. The bell above the door announced him to no one in particular. The hostess near the front was looking at her phone, uniform wrinkled. Hair pulled back in a way that suggested she had stopped caring about specific details. She said, without looking up, that he could sit wherever he wanted. He chose booth 4, central sightline to the whole room. He ordered coffee from the server who came first, a young man named Danny who moved efficiently but with the particular blankness of someone running on autopilot. Not unfriendly, just absent. The way people got absent when the place they worked had stopped feeling worth paying attention to. Warren wrapped his hands around the mug and watched. The lunch rush was building. The dining room filled incrementally, and as it filled, Warren watched the staff move through it and understood within about 8 minutes why the turnover was at 69%. The servers moved with their shoulders raised slightly. A physical posture he recognized, the posture of people who were braced, who had learned to walk through their own workplace in a state of low-grade anticipation of the next unpleasant thing. The food came out slow, not kitchen slow, decision slow. The kind of slow that happened when people stopped trusting that doing their job well would lead to any particular outcome. At the far end of the counter, a woman with silver hair was working the coffee stations. 64 years old, he would estimate. She moved with the economy of someone who had performed these motions so many thousands of times that they required no conscious thought. She was refilling a regular's cup when a man came out of the back office. She stopped, didn't look up, didn't change what she was doing with her hands. Just went very still, the way animals went still in the presence of something that had the authority to harm them, and waited. The man passed without acknowledging her. She resumed pouring. Warren watched the man. 47, maybe. Silver hair, carefully maintained. A Breitling watch, Italian shoes. He moved through the dining room with the ease of someone who had decided a long time ago that rooms belonged to him by default. He stopped at a corner table. Said something that made the customer laugh. Big laugh, the kind that could be turned on and off. Regional manager, had to be. The name in the file was Conrad Spiller. Warren had read the file on the plane, standard management profile, strong quarterly reports, high efficiency ratings, the kind of numbers that looked good at a distance. He was starting to understand what they looked like up close. Then something else moved into his field of vision. A server coming from the kitchen hallway carrying 2 plates. She set them down at the window table with a precision that looked effortless but wasn't. Said something brief to the customer at that table, something that produced a genuine smile rather than the polite kind. Then turned in a smooth arc that brought her toward Warren's booth. He watched her cross the room. She moved differently from everyone else. Not faster, not with more visible effort. The difference was harder to name. She was actually present, in her body. In the room, paying attention the way you paid attention when what was in front of you still mattered to you. She arrived at his table, pulled a small pad from her apron. "Morning!" Her voice was warm in the way that professional warmth sometimes hid, and genuine warmth almost never needed to hide. "Can I get you started with anything else?" "Just the coffee for now. Maybe the pie later if the recommendation holds up." "Sam's been making it since 5 this morning. It'll hold up." She topped off his coffee, set the pot down on the edge of the table. And in the same motion, a motion so smooth and contained he almost missed it, she placed something flat beneath the edge of his saucer. His hand moved toward the coffee. Stopped. Her eyes met his. 2 seconds, maybe slightly less. She kept her voice at a register that wouldn't carry past the adjacent booth. "I know who you are. They're stealing from you. Piedmont Park, tonight, North Gate, 8 o'clock. Come alone." Then at full professional volume, "I'll give you a minute to look at the menu." She was gone. He didn't move for a moment. The coffee cooled beside his hand. The restaurant did what restaurants did, carrying its noise and motion around him while he sat in the middle of it and tried to locate his own thoughts. He slid the note from beneath the saucer. "Read it once, read it again." Small paper, neat handwriting, slightly right-leaning, deliberate. Not someone acting on impulse. Someone who had thought about this. He put the note in his jacket pocket, picked up his coffee, and spent the next 40 minutes being exactly what he appeared to be. An ordinary man eating an exceptionally good piece of apple pie, watching nothing in particular. Except he was watching everything. He watched Conrad Spiller move through the dining room twice more. Watched the way the staff repositioned themselves when he appeared, subtle adjustments in trajectory, the way river water moved around an obstacle. He watched Trace Bellamy, the assistant manager, count cash near the register with his back angled to block the overhead camera. He watched the silver-haired woman at the counter, whose name tag read Opaline, pour coffee for a man in his 70s who had a specific mug preference and who Opaline already knew without being asked. And he watched Renata. He watched her bring extra crackers to an elderly man before he finished asking. Watched her sit briefly at the edge of the booth where a young woman was eating alone and crying quietly, not dramatically, just the soft crying of someone having a hard day, and say something that made the young woman's shoulders come down 2 inches. Watched her smile at Danny when they passed each other near the service station in a way that said, "I see that you're tired and you're doing fine anyway." He paid his check at 12:30, left a tip that was meaningful without being conspicuous. Walked out into the Atlanta noon. His hand went to his jacket pocket. The note was still there. Tonight. Conrad Spiller called Renata into the office at 2:15. She had been expecting it. She had been counting down to it since the moment she'd walked away from booth 4 and felt her hands begin to shake inside her apron pockets. She had let them shake where no one could see. Then she had gone to table 9 and taken an order for 2 club sandwiches and a side of onion rings, and her voice had come out exactly level. She had been managing things like this for 3 weeks. She was getting better at it. She sat down across from Conrad's desk. He remained standing, which was his preference when he wanted to establish something. The desk between them, him on his feet, her seated, the geometry of authority. "You seem a little off today," he said. "Friendly concern." He was very good at friendly concern. "I apologize for that. Bria had a rough night. I think I caught some of her nerves. Bria." He repeated the name the way people repeated names when they wanted you to know they had them filed. "She's almost done with high school, right? 18 in February?" Renata kept her face neutral. He knew her daughter's birthday. She had known abstractly that he paid attention to things like that. Having it confirmed was different from knowing it abstractly. "She is," Renata said. "College applications must be stressful. For both of you." He sat down, folded his hands on the desk. "That customer this morning, booth 4. Gray hoodie. He was there almost 90 minutes. He seems like someone who needed a quiet place. We get those. Did he say anything to you?" He asked if the pie was good. "That's all? That's all." Conrad tilted his head slightly, the micro-adjustment of someone recalibrating. "I notice things, Renata. I want you to know that. What happens in my dining room, who sits where, how long they stay. It's my job to notice." "Of course. I'm glad we understand each other." He stood, which was the signal that the conversation was over. "Oh, one more thing. We want to make sure our best people feel stable here, feel like their future is secure." He let that sit for a moment. "Atlanta can be unpredictable. Circumstances change. I'd hate for any of our top performers to find themselves in a difficult position." He says it the way he said everything, gently, like something offered. Renata stood. Moved to the door at exactly the pace of someone who was completely fine. "Thank you, Mr. Spiller," she said. "I appreciate that." She walked to the women's restroom, closed the door, stood at the sink, ran cold water over her wrists, the inside where the pulse was. An old trick her grandmother had taught her. Something about cold on the pulse points, something about bringing yourself back into your body when your mind was trying to go somewhere else. It worked, mostly. She looked at herself in the mirror. He knew Bria's name, her birthday, her school. He had not threatened anything directly. He never did. But the shape of what he had said was a threat, the same way a shape on the floor was a shadow even if the thing casting it was out of sight. She thought about the man in booth 4, the gray hoodie, the stillness with which he had read the note. The way his hand had stopped halfway to his coffee cup and then, after a moment, moved again. She had watched him for 4 months before today. 4 months of serving him coffee on his irregular visits, once or twice a month, always the same booth, always with a book or a notebook, but more often just sitting and watching the room. She had noticed things about him. The way he tipped more on days when she could tell the staff was struggling. The afternoon Opaline had dropped a full tray of glassware, and he had been the first person off his stool, helping collect the pieces before Opaline had to kneel down. The way he spoke to Danny, who was 19 and still learning how to exist in spaces where adults expected things from him. Like Danny was someone worth speaking to. She had known who he was from the second month. A magazine in the pediatrician's waiting room. She had almost approached him then. But she hadn't known enough yet. She had needed to know what kind of man he actually was, not what kind of man his press coverage claimed he was. 4 months of watching had given her an answer. She dried her hands, unlocked the door, went back to the floor. She had 6 hours until the park. October in Atlanta still carried warmth after dark, but just barely. The air had given up some of its summer weight and gone cleaner, and the park at 8 in the evening had the specific quality of a place in transition between its daytime and nighttime selves. Warren arrived at the North Gate at 7:48, earlier than he needed to be. He had told himself this was logistics. It wasn't entirely logistics. He hadn't been nervous about a professional situation in a very long time. He had negotiated acquisitions that involved 9 figures. He had sat across from people who wanted to destroy what he'd built, and had done so without his voice-changing register. He had handled the Raleigh situation, the aftermath of it, without letting anyone see what it had done to him internally. This felt different, and he wasn't entirely sure why. He walked slowly along the path inside the North Gate. The park was busy enough for anonymity, joggers, couples. A group of older men playing cards at a concrete table under a lamp with the focused intensity of people who had been playing cards together for 20 years and had no intention of stopping. He heard her footsteps before he saw her. Quick, deliberate, the walk of someone who was always calculating something. She came through the gate in dark jeans and a brown jacket, hair down from the bun she'd worn at work. She moved differently out here than she had in the diner, and it took him a moment to identify the difference. At the diner, she carried the particular alertness of someone who was always being watched. Out here in the dark, she was still alert but differently. This alertness belonged to her, not to Conrad's office or the overhead camera angles or the question of who was watching her. She saw him. They fell into step together without greeting, taking the path that curved away from the main fountain area and toward the quieter north end of the lake. Neither of them spoke for the first 100 yards. Then she said, "You stayed for almost 90 minutes. The pie was exceptional. Sam starts at 5 every morning. He takes it seriously. A pause. Conrad noticed you. He called me in after the lunch rush. What did he say? Nothing specific. That's his method. He implies. He suggests. He mentions things he shouldn't know, like my daughter's birthday, like it's casual." She kept her eyes on the path ahead. He's very good at making threats that sound like concerns. How long has it been like this? The theft pattern started, from what I can document, about 18 months ago. The intimidation started when I began asking quiet questions, about 3 months ago. You've been documenting it. I've been documenting what I can see, which is limited to what my position gives me access to. She reached into her jacket pocket and produced the blue notebook, held it out to him. 3 weeks of specific records. Before that, I was still figuring out the scope. He took it, felt the weight of it, not physical weight, the other kind. Walk me through it, he said. She did. 45 minutes. Steady pace around the lake. She talked the way she did everything, organized, specific, without embellishment. The register variants she'd first noticed in early October. The vendor invoices that didn't match delivery logs. The overheard phone call in the hallway that mentioned the Wednesday run. Conrad and Trace Bellamy's movements during the late shifts. The truck she had seen through the cracked window at the end of the kitchen hallway 3 Thursdays ago, backing up to the loading dock after midnight, things going out rather than coming in. He opened the notebook while she talked, read as she spoke. Her written records matched her verbal account with the consistency of someone who did not need to manage the story, because the story was what actually happened. The vendor fraud alone, she said, as they completed the lake circuit and started a second loop. If the pattern in my sample 3 weeks held for 18 months is, you're looking at a minimum of 800,000. Probably more, and that's before whatever the loading dock activity represents, which you don't know yet, not specifically. But the structure of it, the timing, the unmarked vehicles, the cash exchange I witnessed, it's not food. It's not restaurant supplies. Whatever Conrad is moving through that building, it has nothing to do with running a restaurant. Warren closed the notebook. Held it. Why didn't you go to the police? He said. She glanced at him sideways, not irritated, just measuring whether he actually wanted the answer or whether he was asking reflexively. The internal reporting line for this location runs through Conrad Spiller, she said. I found that out on my 4th week. As for the police, there are 2 officers who eat at the diner regularly. Conrad treats them like friends, comps their meals. I have no way of knowing how far the relationship goes, and I can't risk finding out the wrong way. So you waited for me. I waited until I had something worth bringing to someone who could act on it and who I had reason to trust. She said it plainly, without apology. I've been watching you come into that diner for 4 months, Mr. Gideon. I know how you treat the people who work for you when you think no one important is looking. Warren processed that. 4 months. She had been watching him for 4 months, building a case for his character the same way she'd been building a case against Conrad. Parallel notebooks, in a sense. One written down, one kept in her head. What did you decide, he asked, that you were worth the risk? They walked in silence for a moment. The lake moved beside them, dark and steady. I have a daughter, Renata said, not as an explanation, as context. Bria, she's 17. She spent the last 3 weeks watching me come home from work carrying something I won't talk about. She's smart enough to know something is wrong and patient enough not to push. She paused. The reason I'm telling you this is because when Conrad mentioned her name today, her birthday, her school, I understood that staying quiet was no such a safe option I had been telling myself it was. There is no safe option now. There's only the option that gives me the best chance of protecting her. Warren looked at her. That meant coming to me, he said. That meant coming to someone who could do something. Yes. She stopped walking, turned to face him fully, there on the path with the lake behind her and the park lights making uncertain shadows. I need you to understand something before you decide what to do with that notebook, she said. I'm not asking you to rescue me. I'm asking you to stand with me while I finish what I started. Those are different things. He looked at her for a long moment. He thought about Clara. He thought about the 14 months of a Phoenix merger while a young woman tried twice to tell him something was wrong. He thought about too late and the specific weight of that phrase when you had to carry it for years. What do you need from me tonight? He asked. Take the notebook. Have your financial team verify what I've documented, and come back tomorrow. Different table. I'll be there. And then we figure out what comes next. Together. He looked at the notebook in his hand. Small thing. Dollar store cover. Weeks of someone choosing to pay attention when it would have been so much easier not to. I'll be there at 10, he said. She nodded. Turned toward the gate she had come through. Renata, she stopped. You said 4 months, watching me come in. Yes, what made you sure in the end? She thought about it. Actually thought, not the quick answer. The afternoon Opaline dropped the tray, she said. You were off your stool before she'd even registered what had happened. You picked up the pieces and then you looked at her, not at the mess. And you said, these things happen, not like something to say, like something you meant. She walked out through the north gate. Warren stood on the path and listened to her footsteps fade. Then he opened the notebook to the first page and stood under a park lamp and read. He stood there for a while. On his way back to the hotel, his phone buzzed. Unknown number, a single text. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. He read it, put the phone in his pocket, kept walking. He had made exactly one decision tonight, and it hadn't felt like a mistake. It had felt, for the first time in longer than he could clearly remember, like the right thing. Warren had not slept, not because of the unknown number, not because of the text. Those things he could file under variables and manage accordingly. He hadn't slept because of the notebook. He had read it 3 times, cover to cover, every entry, every date. Every number Renata had written in her neat, slightly right-leaning hand in the specific light of whatever corner of her apartment she had been sitting in when she wrote it. And the further he read, the stiller he had become, until somewhere around 2 in the morning he was sitting in the hotel chair with the notebook in his lap and the lamp on beside him, and he wasn't reading anymore. He was just sitting with the full weight of what the notebook meant. October 4th, register variance, dinner service. $340 short against her count. Trace Bellamy at the register during the final hour. October 7th, vendor invoice for Coastal Premium Meats, $4,200. No delivery recorded for that date. No receiving signature in the log. October 9th, overheard Conrad on the phone in the hallway. He said the Wednesday run is clean. Don't know what this means yet. She had written that last line. Don't know what this means yet. And then she had kept writing, night after night, shift after shift, building a record of what she witnessed with the patience of someone who understood that truth needed documentation to survive. She had done this while worrying about Bria's school fees, while working a full schedule, while living inside the daily reality of a workplace where the person with the most authority had made it clear that observing too much was a category of behavior with consequences. She had done it anyway. Warren set the notebook on the nightstand at 5:50 a.m. and called Douglas. Douglas Wren had been his CFO for 11 years. He was a precise man who arrived early, left late, and communicated primarily in specifics. He picked up on the second ring, which meant he had already been at his desk. I need everything from the Atlanta location, Warren said. Vidor invoices, purchase orders, delivery confirmations, daily register reports, every financial transaction for the past 2 years. Full audit package. How fast? End of business today. A brief pause. The pause of someone calculating how many scheduled things would need to move. I'll clear my afternoon. One more thing. I need you to pull every location Conrad Spiller has managed. His entire history with the company and anything you can find about his work before us. This pause was longer. Warren, Douglas said carefully. Should I loop in legal? Not yet, just the information first. He hung up, stood at the window, Atlanta at 6 in the morning. The sky doing the thing it did here, going from black to a particular shade of blue-gray that New York never quite achieved, the light arriving horizontally before it arrived vertically, laying across the city like something being placed gently rather than switched on. He showered, changed into the same jeans, a different shirt, got coffee from the machine in the hallway, which was terrible in the way hotel hallway coffee was always terrible, and drank it at the window while he thought. The text from last night. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. Whoever sent it knew he had met Renata, which meant he was being watched, which meant Conrad, or someone working with Conrad, had known he was in Atlanta before he walked into the diner yesterday. He thought about that. He had booked the flight on his own account, his own name, standard purchase. His assistant Jennifer had not been informed because he hadn't called her, which meant the information had come from somewhere else. He picked up the phone, called Jennifer. She answered on the first ring, already mid-sentence about a meeting she was rescheduling for Thursday. He interrupted gently. Jennifer, last week, did anyone call asking about my schedule? My travel plans? A beat. Actually, yes. On Friday afternoon. Someone called the main line asking about your availability for a... Let me find it. He said it was a surprise quality review they were planning for the Atlanta location. He wanted to make sure you wouldn't be doing a formal inspection at the same time. Who was it? He said he was the assistant manager. A Trace, I think. Trace something. The sound of her looking at her notes. He seemed very organized, very professional. What did you tell him? That you hadn't scheduled anything formal, that you tended to do surprise visits on Tuesdays or Wednesdays when you traveled informally. A pause. Warren, did I do something wrong? No, he said. You did exactly what you were supposed to do. Thank you. He set the phone down. So, Trace Bellamy had called his office on Friday, had extracted the travel pattern from Jennifer without her knowing she was being mined for it, and then had told Conrad, who had had the entire weekend to prepare. Which meant Renata approaching him in the diner yesterday was not the spontaneous act it had appeared to be. She had taken her moment when it arrived, but Conrad had been ready for the visit in a way Warren had not anticipated, and still, someone had sent that text after the park meeting, which meant he was being watched more closely than he had realized. He picked up his phone one more time, called a number he kept in a separate contact list, unlabeled except for his initials. A private investigator named Ray who had worked with him twice before on matters requiring discretion and speed. I need a background profile, Warren said. Full depth. Name is Conrad Spiller. Current regional manager at my Atlanta location. I need it by tonight. 12-hour turnaround, Ray said. Premium rate. That's fine. He pocketed the phone, drank the rest of the terrible coffee, and began preparing to go back to the diner. Different shirt. Different table. Booth 2 this time, closer to the counter, with a clear line of sight to the register and the kitchen pass-through. Same gray hoodie. He had only packed for an overnight. He was on day 2. The morning crowd was thinner than Tuesday. A few regulars at the counter. A table of nurses finishing a night shift, the specific exhaustion of people who had been competent through things most people didn't see and were now allowing themselves to be less than competent at the task of choosing what to order. They needed pancakes and quiet in equal measure. Opaline was working the counter. He watched her without appearing to watch her. 64 years old. Silver haircut, close and practical. Shands that moved with the unconscious precision of someone who had repeated these motions tens of thousands of times, who had stopped having to think about the pour, the wipe, the refill. She knew the regular in the third stool liked his coffee with the mug already warm. She brought it that way without being asked. She looked up once and caught Warren's eye. Brief, neutral, looked away. But in that look, he saw something that confirmed what he'd been building toward since yesterday. Not recognition of who he was. Something more particular than that. The look of someone who had been paying close attention to the wrong things for a long time, and had learned to make that attention invisible. She knew something, too. He couldn't be certain yet, but he filed it. Renata came out of the kitchen hallway at 10:20. She was carrying 2 plates for the window table. She set them down, said something brief to the customer, and turned in the direction of booth 2 without looking at him directly. She arrived. Pad out. Professional. Morning. Then under it, just audible, Conrad is in early. Loading dock activity last night, after close. I couldn't see clearly. The Wednesday run, whatever that is, it's happening tonight. At full volume. Can I start you with coffee? Please. And the eggs if Sam's in. Sam's always in. She was gone. Warren spent the next 2 hours at booth 2, drinking coffee and eating eggs and watching Conrad Spiller conduct his morning. The man was good at his performance. Moved through the restaurant with easy authority, speaking to customers, checking in with staff, managing the visible surface of the operation with the smooth efficiency of someone who had done this professionally for years. He genuinely knew how to run a restaurant. Warren could see that. Which was the thing that made the rest of it more complicated, not less. Because the theft wasn't the product of incompetence. It was built alongside competence, layered underneath a functional operation designed to look like a failing one. He watched Trace Bellamy move between the stockroom and the back office 3 times in 2 hours, always carrying something, always with his back positioned to reduce visibility. He watched the interaction between Trace and the kitchen staff, the specific social geometry of people who were inside something and people who were not. He watched Renata. She worked every table with the same genuine attention she had shown yesterday. The nurses got extra coffee without asking. An older man at the counter who came in alone and ate slowly the way people ate when they were in no hurry to go back to wherever they came from, got a brief conversation with Renata that visibly improved his morning. Not performative warmth. The real thing. The kind that costs something to give, and Renata apparently gave without accounting for the cost. At 12:45, Conrad came out of his office and walked the room in the way he did, surveying, assessing. His eyes moved across the tables while paused on Warren's booth for perhaps a second longer than the others, then moved on. Warren paid his check at one, left a tip he had thought about this time. Enough to matter, not so much that it stood out. Outside, standing on State Street in the October noon, he called Douglas. "Tell me," he said. Douglas talked for 12 minutes without stopping, which was not something Douglas did. Douglas communicated in precise, bounded statements. When he talked for 12 minutes without pausing, it meant the information was too large for his usual compression. 41 fraudulent vendor invoices across 18 months. Company names that existed on paper, registered properly with tax identification numbers and mailing addresses, but that led, when Douglas's team followed the threads, to shell entities. 2 in Delaware, 1 in Wyoming, 1 in Georgia, registered 6 months before Conrad joined the company. The register variances, consistent his daily discrepancy between point-of-sale data and the daily cash report, ranging from $300 to $800 per day, every operating day for the full duration of Conrad's tenure. Total estimate, vendor fraud plus register skimming, between $1.2 and $1.6 million. This is not opportunistic, Douglas said. He had arrived at this conclusion before Warren had. The shell companies were created before he joined us. The accounting methodology was designed to stay below our automated audit threshold. Someone built this framework in advance. He knew what our threshold was. He would have, yes. It's disclosed in our management contract. Warren sat with that. Conrad had read the management contract, found the audit threshold, built his operation to stay beneath it, had started creating the financial infrastructure months before he started the job. This was not a man who had arrived and seen an opportunity. This was a man who had arrived with a plan he had made somewhere else. Ray's report came through at 5:30. Warren read it the way he had read Renata's notebook, slowly, without rushing past the parts that were difficult. Conrad Spiller, born 1977, Nashville, Vanderbilt business degree, moved into restaurant management in his mid-20s with clear competence and genuine ambition. Built Spiller Table, a Memphis-based regional chain from a single location to 14 over 8 years. By any measure, a success story. And then 2011. Meridian Restaurant Partners, a larger hospitality group, had approached Spiller Table about an acquisition. The deal had been structured on paper as a partnership. What it actually was, reading the legal documents Ray had obtained through a court filing from the subsequent lawsuit, was a hostile acquisition disguised as a collaboration. Conrad's equity stake had been calculated using a valuation methodology that his own attorneys had challenged unsuccessfully. He had received a fraction of what the company was worth. The transition plan, which had promised him a senior role in the merged entity, lasted 4 months before he received a termination notice by email. On a Friday afternoon, he had sued. The suit had been settled out of court under seal. The settlement, by Ray's estimate based on tax filings, had been insufficient to compensate for what was lost. Within 18 months of the settlement, Conrad had sold his house. 12 months after that, his marriage had ended. For 2 years, his record showed almost nothing. Small consulting work. A single restaurant attempt under a new name that closed in 11 months, and then he had resurfaced. Regional management roles. Different companies, different cities. Ray had flagged 3 prior locations where Conrad had served as regional manager. At 2 of them, the host company had experienced significant unexplained losses attributed to vendor fraud and operational decline within 18 months of his arrival. Both companies had sold those locations at reduced valuations. The buyers in both cases were entities that Ray's investigation suggested were connected to Conrad through intermediaries. At the 3rd location in Nashville, the owner had fought the resulting fraud charges for 3 years, had won, ultimately, but the legal costs had consumed everything he had saved. And then there was the Louisville case. Ray had written a single line about it, separate from the others, set apart by a space. Marcus Webb, Louisville, KY, no longer operating. Outcome per attached. Warren opened the attachment. Read it. Set his phone face down on the table. He sat for a long time. Marcus Webb had been 44 years old. He had run a single restaurant in Louisville for 11 years. He had not had the resources to fight the fraud charges Conrad's operation had constructed against him. He had sold the restaurant at a loss, and 8 months later he was not there anymore. Warren picked up the phone again, turned it over, looked at the ceiling. 8 restaurant owners. 8 people who had built something and had it taken from them by a man who had experienced having his own thing taken and had decided, somewhere in the wreckage of that experience, that the correct response was to become the machine that had destroyed him. This was not about money. The money was real and the money was significant. But what Conrad was doing was not primarily about money. It was about something older and more corroded than that. He called Ray back. The entities that purchased the 2 locations after Conrad's operators sold. Can you trace them any further? Already did. 3rd layer in, they connect to a holding company in Georgia, registered 14 months ago. 14 months ago, 2 months after Conrad joined Gideon Hospitality. So Conrad wasn't just stealing from the locations he managed. He was degrading them to the point where they could be acquired cheaply, by him, under other names. Warren's restaurant wasn't failing. It was being prepared to be sold. He set the phone down, stood up, went to the window. Atlanta at 6 in the evening. The city going amber in the horizontal light, the kind of late afternoon that made ordinary things look like they had been specifically arranged. He thought about what Renata had said in the park. I'm not asking you to rescue me. I'm asking you to stand with me while I finish what I started. He thought about the notebook, 3 weeks of documentation, 4 months of observation before that. The daily discipline of paying attention to wrong things in a place that made paying attention dangerous. He thought about the text from last night. Someone watching. Someone who knew he had gone to the park, and he thought about tonight. The Wednesday run. Whatever that meant. Whatever came out of the loading dock under the unmarked vehicles and the cash exchange in the work light. He picked up his phone, opened a contact he had added this morning after Douglas's first call. A name Douglas had mentioned in passing, the way Douglas mentioned things he had researched without being asked to research. Darlene Foss, FBI Atlanta, financial crimes and trafficking intersection cases. He had not called it yet. He called it now. Renata got home at 6:40. She could feel it in her legs. The specific tiredness that came not from physical exertion, but from sustained vigilance. From 8 hours of performing ordinary work while maintaining a separate layer of attention underneath it. It was the kind of exhaustion that sleep didn't fully fix, because it came from something more fundamental than not resting. It came from living at a frequency higher than normal human operating range for too long. Bria was at the kitchen table, laptop open. 2 textbooks arranged with the organizational logic only Bria fully understood. Half an apple going brown at the edge, which meant she had been there long enough to start eating and then forget about it. The smell of something warm in the oven. There's chicken, Bria said without looking up. You cooked. I put chicken in the oven. That's adjacent to cooking. Renata set her bag down. The blue notebook was inside it. She had carried it to work every day for 3 weeks, always in the inner pocket, always aware of its specific weight against her side. She washed her hands. Got plates. They ate at the small table the way they always did, the city outside going dark incrementally, the gospel music from below doing its nightly thing. Bria finished half her chicken and then pushed the plate to the side with the deliberateness of someone who had made a decision. She looked at her mother directly. Tell me, she said. Not a question, an invitation with the shape of a demand. Renata set down her fork, looked at her daughter. She had been not telling Bria for 3 weeks, protecting her, keeping the weight on one side of the wall where Bria couldn't reach it. But Bria's 17 and she had her grandmother's instincts, and she had been watching Renata come home for 3 weeks carrying something invisible and heavy, and the thing about Bria was that she did not push. She waited, and she had been waiting long enough. Renata told her, not all of it. Enough. The theft, the intimidation. The man in the gray hoodie who had turned out to be the owner. The park, the notebook, tonight, and what it might mean. Bria listened the way she listened to things that mattered, without interrupting, without her face doing the dramatic things faces did when people were performing concern. Just listening, her elbows on the table, her eyes on her mother. When Renata finished, there was a moment of quiet. The man, Bria said, the owner, Warren Gideon. You've been watching him for 4 months. Yes. And you decided he was worth trusting. Yes. Based on what? Renata thought about it. Not the easy version, the true one. Based on the way he treated the people around him when he thought it didn't matter, when no one important was watching. Those are the moments that tell you who someone actually is. Bria absorbed that. Filed it. What happens tonight? I'm on closing shift. There's activity at the loading dock after close on Wednesdays. I need to see what's happening and document it. Warren is going to be outside Sisop, and if something goes wrong, I have his number. And I've called Mrs. Ellard, their neighbor in 4B, who had a spare key and who had agreed, without asking for specifics, to be available tonight. Mrs. Ellard was the kind of person who responded to quiet requests from neighbors she trusted without requiring explanations. Renata had been quietly grateful for her for 2 years. Bria nodded slowly. Then she said something she had been holding, Renata could tell, since the beginning of the conversation. Grandpa's thing, Bria said. About peace, about the cost. She paused. I wrote about it in my AP paper, about why people stay quiet. I said sometimes you have to be the first person to stand so someone else can find their footing. She looked at her mother. I was thinking about you when I wrote that. I just didn't know I was. Renata felt something move in her throat that she did not have words for, the specific sensation of being seen accurately by someone who loved you. She reached across the table, covered Bria's hand with hers. After tonight, she said, I think things change. Good change or hard change? Both, probably. Bria turned her hand over and squeezed back. Then I'll be here either way. They finished dinner. Washed the dishes together. Renata went to her room to change into her work clothes. She stood in front of the small mirror on the back of her closet door. She was scared. She had been scared for 3 weeks, and she was still scared, and she had stopped waiting for the fear to go away before she acted, because it wasn't going to. Fear was not a condition with a resolution. It was a condition with a choice. She picked up her bag, the notebook inside it. She thought about the man in booth 4 yesterday, the 2 seconds when their eyes had met, the way he had gone very still, not frozen, still. The way people went still when they were deciding something, and the decision was serious. He had come back this morning, different shirt, same hoodie, same booth 2 she'd directed him to without words. He had come back. She went out to catch the bus. The dining room closed at 10. By 10:30, the last customers were gone and the staff was moving through the closing routine with the muscle memory of people who had done this hundreds of times. Danny was counting chairs. Gloria from the morning prep shift had stayed late to help with a large party's aftermath and was now consolidating the salt shakers. Renata was doing the end-of-night inventory, working her way systematically through the checklist, clipboard in hand. Conrad had arrived at 9:15. He had told Danny he could leave early. Then he had gone to the back office and stayed there. Trace was in the stockroom. At 10:52, Renata's phone buzzed against her thigh. Warren, in position. Dark blue Accord, east side of state. Can see the loading dock from here. She texted back. Conrad arrived early. Trace in stockroom. 2 others I haven't identified came in through the back at 10:20. Warren, 4 total plus Conrad? Renata, yes. Different from 4. More people. Warren, stay visible. Kitchen hallway only if you need to. Text every 15 minutes. She put the phone away and continued the inventory. Item by item, the way you got through things that required patience, one thing at a time. At 11:07, she heard the truck. She knew the sound by now. The specific engine note of the van that came on Wednesdays, different from the morning delivery trucks, lower, less rattling, and the particular sound of tires on the alley gravel at low speed. She moved toward the kitchen, kept the clipboard. Made it look like the inventory was taking her in that direction. The window at the end of the kitchen hallway, the one with the crack, the pane that separated into a clear strip at the fault line. She positioned herself at the right angle. Looked through one van, but larger than before, and not one van. Two. She counted quickly. Conrad, Trace. The two unidentified men from earlier, plus two from the first van and three from the second. 9 people total in the loading dock area. Her breath went shallow. She brought it back deliberately. She watched as the van doors opened. The boxes coming out were different from the previous Wednesday. Smaller, more uniform. The kind of box that suggested electronics. Multiple units per box. And the men moving them were moving fast, with the coordinated efficiency of people working to a timeline. She had her phone out, camera. She positioned it low, below the window ledge, angled up through the crack. The images would be dark, but they would show the vehicles, show the activity. Show Conrad's face when the work light caught it at the right angle. She was so focused on keeping her hands steady that she almost didn't hear the footsteps, almost. She turned. Trace Bellamy was standing at the entrance to the kitchen hallway, looking at her. She held the clipboard up, automatic. I was checking the dry goods inventory. The flour count didn't match the morning log. He looked at the clipboard, looked at her phone, looked at the window behind her. Conrad wants to see you, he said. Not the voice of someone relaying an ordinary message. The voice of someone who already knew the answer to a question Conrad was about to ask. Renata walked ahead of him to the office. Her steps were the same as always, even, unhurried, every cell in her body doing something different than her steps suggested. She had managed to send one text before Trace appeared. Not the 15-minute update, just 2 words. She hoped Warren had read it. Conrad was behind the desk. 2 men she didn't know were standing near the door. The office felt smaller than it usually did, though the dimensions hadn't changed. Sit down, Renata. She sat. I've been patient with you, Conrad said. He said it the way he said most things, gently, like a teacher explaining something to a student who had repeatedly misunderstood. I've tried to be clear about what this environment requires, what loyalty looks like, what the alternative looks like. She didn't answer. I need to know who you've been talking to. He put both hands flat on the desk. And I need to know now. I don't know what you mean. Don't. The single word. Quiet. Worse than volume. I've been doing my job, she said. I've done my job every shift for 19 months. You've been watching the loading dock. I've been doing inventory in the kitchen. The hallway is part of that. Conrad looked at her for a long moment, the look of someone running a calculation and arriving at a number he didn't like. He opened a desk drawer, took out a single sheet of paper, typed, slid it across the desk toward her. Read this, he said. Out loud when I ask you to. It's a phone call. We'll record it, you'll send it, and then this situation resolves itself cleanly. She looked at the paper without touching it. Mr. Gideon, I need to tell you the truth. I was hired to approach you. Everything I told you was fabricated. The notebook is not accurate. I was paid to deceive you, and I'm leaving Atlanta tonight. Please don't look for me. She read it twice, looked up. No, she said. Conrad's expression didn't change. Renata, no. The second one quieter than the first, not from diminishing resolve, from the opposite. She had said no to things her whole life, no to the idea that her circumstances defined her ceiling, no to the version of Bria's father who had suggested that their daughter's medical complications early on were a reason to leave, no to the floor manager at the accounting firm where she'd temped who had suggested that a woman without a degree shouldn't expect to do work that required thinking. No was a word she had a long history with. This one was the most important she had ever said. You have a daughter, Conrad said, still gentle, still the voice of someone concerned. I know I have a daughter. Chicago can be unpredictable. Atlanta, she said. We're in Atlanta. A small thing, a correction. She made it because she could, because accuracy was one of the things she still controlled. Conrad looked at her for a long moment. The 2 men near the door had not moved. Trace was somewhere behind her. She could feel it, that specific awareness of a person positioned at your back. I'm going to give you some time to reconsider, Conrad said. He nodded at the man to his left. She did not see what happened next until the world tilted sideways and her cheek connected with the edge of the desk, and she was on the floor, and the pain arrived about 2 seconds after the event, the way pain always arrived, a moment too late to be useful as a warning. She got herself upright, sat in the chair. Her left cheekbone was registering information she didn't have time to process. She looked at Conrad. He looked back. She said nothing. And outside, in a dark blue Accord parked on the east side of State Street, a phone lit up with a message that had been sent 3 minutes ago before Trace had appeared in the hallway doorway. 2 words. They know. Warren read them. Read them again. He was out of the car before he had finished reading the second time. Warren had called Agent Foss from the car. Not from panic. From the specific clarity that arrived when all the variables collapsed into a single point, and the only question left was what to do about it. He had dialed the number he'd saved that afternoon. It had rung 4 times. He had been prepared for voicemail. Then she picked up. Foss. This is Warren Gideon. I called you earlier today. I remember. The situation has moved faster than anticipated. I have an employee inside the Atlanta location right now who I believe is being detained. I need to know how quickly you can have people at 847 State Street. A pause, not hesitation. Assessment, 7 minutes. I'll be there in 2. Mr. Gideon, stay outside. Let us handle the entry. Understood. He had said understood. He had meant it at the time. He lasted 90 seconds in the parking lot before he moved, not recklessness. The calculation was simple. Agent Foss had 7 minutes. Renata had been inside for longer than that already. 7 minutes was 7 minutes. He had no weapon, no authority, no backup. What he had was a phone, the building layout from the renovation files he had reviewed 4 years ago, and the specific knowledge that the loading dock door was habitually left unlatched during deliveries. He went around the east side of the building. The alley smelled like old grease and cardboard. 2 of Conrad's men were visible near the south corner, smoking, facing away from him. The work light over the loading dock threw a cone of yellow into the dark. The dock door was open, inches. He pressed his back to the brick beside it, listened. Voices from inside, muffled by the stock shelving. One of them was Conrad, the particular measured cadence of a man who never raised his voice because he had never needed to. And then, cutting through it, something that stopped Warren's breathing for a half-second. Renata's voice, saying clearly without tremor, "I'm not reading it." He pushed the door and went in. The storage areas was exactly as the renovation plans had shown it. Metal shelving floor to ceiling. Industrial supply buses. The kind of space that existed in every commercial kitchen in America, functional and anonymous, a single fluorescent tube at the far end. He moved through the shelving toward the office light. Through the gap between a stack of flour sacks and the wall, he could see into the office doorway. Conrad behind the desk, 2 men he didn't know near the door, Trace Bellamy against the side wall, and Renata in the chair, her back straight, her left cheekbone showing the beginning of something that made Warren's jaw tighten in a way he noted and set aside. Conrad was speaking. The patient tone of someone explaining consequences to a person who had not yet understood them. "This can still resolve cleanly," Conrad said. "1 phone call. That's all." "No," Renata said. Warren stepped through the office doorway. 5 faces turned. He raised his phone. Screen forward. Already connected, already live audio call he had opened in the alley before he came in. "I'd suggest everyone stay where they are," he said. The 2 men near the door moved, stopped. Because what was on the phone screen had registered. 3 faces in split screen. Douglas, his CFO, in his home office, the wall of financial documents visible behind him. His attorney, Patricia Lane, who had also been awake and waiting since his call an hour ago, and a 3rd face. A woman in a dark jacket, seated in what appeared to be a vehicle, the blue and red periphery of emergency lights already moving in the background behind her. Conrad looked at the screen, looked at Warren. Something moved behind his eyes, not fear. The specific expression of a man whose calculation had just returned an unexpected result. "Agent Darlene Foss," Warren said. "FBI Atlanta. She's been building a case on your operation for 9 months. He kept his voice level. The voice he used in boardrooms when he needed people to hear precisely what he was saying. "The vehicles outside, the men you brought in tonight, the merchandise in those vans, all of it is being documented right now by a federal team that is approximately 4 minutes from this building. A silence, the kind of silence that had a specific texture, the texture of a room full of people doing rapid recalculation. "You're bluffing," Trace said from the wall. Warren looked at him, not with aggression, with the simple steadiness of someone who had nothing to perform. "Am I?" he said. "Not a question." Trace looked at the phone, looked at the window behind Conrad's desk where the first peripheral flicker of blue and red light was beginning to show through the blinds. He looked away first. Conrad had not moved. He was standing behind his desk with his hands at his sides and his face doing something complicated, not the performance of calm he usually managed. Something underneath the performance, showing through at the edges. Warren crossed the office to Renata's chair, crouched beside it. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't entirely read, not relief. Something more specific than relief. Her hands were not bound. He had half expected them to be. She had been sitting in the chair of her own will, which told him something about what kind of situation this had been, not physical restraint. A different kind. "Can you stand?" he asked. "I've been able to stand this whole time," she said. She stood. Warren straightened beside her, turned to face Conrad. Here's what's going to happen, he said. You're going to stay in this room. You're not going to touch anything, call anyone, or move toward the door. In approximately 3 minutes, federal agents are going to come through the loading dock entrance, and you're going to let them. Conrad looked at him. Really looked. The way you looked at something you had misjudged. You came back, Conrad said. I didn't expect you to come back. I know. Most people don't. Warren held his gaze. I know that too. The lights through the blinds went from occasional to constant. The sound of vehicle doors, footsteps on the loading dock. Agent Darlene Foss came through the storage area doorway first. 51 years old, dark jacket, the movement of someone who had walked into difficult rooms many times and had learned to do it without announcement. 2 agents behind her, more outside. She looked around the office, took inventory with the efficiency of someone whose inventory was always accurate. Mr. Spiller, she said, we've been looking for you for a while. Conrad said nothing, which was, Warren thought, the correct legal decision and probably the first correct decision he had made all evening. Trey spoke instead. Several sentences. None of them helped him. The 2 men near the door were practical about it. The math had changed, and they could see that it had changed, and they made the decision that people make when the math changes. Agent Foss looked at Renata, at her cheekbone. We're going to need a statement, and we're going to need medical attention. In that order or reversed, your choice. Medical first, Warren said. Renata looked at him. The statement will keep, he said. Your face won't. She almost argued. He could see it, then she didn't. Medical first, she agreed. They walked out through the loading dock together, past the 2 vans and the boxes being documented by Foss's team, past the men in handcuffs sitting against the alley wall, out into the October night where the air was clean and cold, and the sirens had stopped because there was no longer anything to announce. Warren didn't reach for her hand. Didn't put his arm around her. He walked beside her, close enough that she could feel he was there, and that was enough. That was what she had asked for. Not rescue. Someone to stand with her. He was standing. Grady Memorial at 1:30 in the morning had the quality of a place that had seen everything. Not grim. Not dramatic. Simply experienced. The kind of institutional calm that came from being the place where the city sent its hardest nights for a very long time. Renata had a bruised cheekbone. 2 butterfly closures on her lower lip where it had split against the desk edge. Bruised ribs on the left side. The attending physician was thorough and slightly stern about ice pack protocol, which Renata received with the patience of someone who had more pressing concerns. Warren sat in the hallway outside the exam room, hard plastic chair, the kind designed to be easy to clean rather than comfortable to occupy. He needed air. He walked outside, the ambulance bay on the south side of the building. The night was still cold, properly cold now, the October air having finished whatever it had started earlier in the evening and arrived at something final. He stood under the overhead lights with his hands in his jacket pockets and let the cold do what cold did, which was clarify things. He thought about Conrad. Not with anger. He had expected anger, and what he found instead was something more complicated. The investigator's report had laid out the architecture of a man who had built something real. Spiller table, 14 locations, 8 years, genuine effort and genuine love for the work, and had had it taken from him in an email on a Friday afternoon. An email. Like a notation on an administrative list, Warren had been in enough boardrooms to know exactly how those decisions got made. The acquired company's management was always the cleanest line item to cut, most efficient, easiest to justify in the restructuring language that lawyers and accountants use to make the terrible things sound procedural. Conrad had experienced the full weight of that procedure, and then he had spent 13 years becoming it. That was the thing Warren kept returning to, the specific tragedy of it. Not that Conrad had become cruel, but that the cruelty was so recognizably shaped by the wound. Every restaurant owner he had targeted was a version of the man who had sent that email. Every location he had degraded was a version of Spiller table being handed to strangers who hadn't built it. He understood that. He didn't excuse it. Understanding and excusing were different operations. He thought about Marcus Webb in Louisville, about the name in Nashville that led nowhere. He thought about Clara, about the Raleigh location and the 14 months of Phoenix merger and the moment when handling it had meant nothing was handled. He had come to Atlanta because he couldn't arrive too late again. And he hadn't, but the cost of other people's too late moments was already paid and could not be recovered. Marcus Webb's restaurant, the 8 owners, the one who hadn't survived the losing. He stood outside in the cold and let himself know the full weight of that, not as guilt. The specific responsibility of someone who had the resources to fix systems and had not fast enough Then he went back inside. Agent Foss was in the hallway when he returned. Dark jacket. The contained efficiency of someone who had been awake this long before and had stopped treating it as unusual. She looked at him with the directness of someone who didn't soften professional conversations unnecessarily. Conrad and Trace Bellamy are processed, she said. The two primary men from the loading dock crew are cooperating. The merchandise in the vans is confirmed stolen electronics, 3 different retail theft operations feeding into Conrad's distribution network. How long has this been running? The network across multiple restaurant locations, at least 4 years. Conrad's version, the one that layers financial fraud on top, about 3 years. She opened a small notebook. Your Atlanta location was one of 6 active distribution points. We hit 3 tonight. The other 3 are being taken down in the next 24 hours. The previous cases, the restaurant owners. That's a longer conversation. But it's on the table. A pause, not hesitation, something more considered. I want to ask you something. Go ahead. How did you know the video was false? Warren had been waiting for this question. She doesn't talk with her hands still, he said. In the video, both hands were flat on her thighs, perfectly still. In every real conversation I've had with Renata Holloway, her hands are part of how she thinks. When she explained something, her hands were always part of it. He looked at the floor. The video had the right face and the right voice, but it didn't have the right hands. Foss looked at him for a moment. That's observant. She showed me what observant looked like. I was catching up. Foss closed her notebook. One more thing. The case file. How it was opened. She said it in the way Douglas mentioned things he had researched without being explicitly asked. We received a communication approximately 3 months ago, before your involvement. Documentation of irregular financial activity at the Atlanta location. Dates, amounts, descriptions. A pause. The handwriting was neat, slightly right-leaning, sent from a mailbox on the south side of Atlanta. We couldn't identify the sender, but the material was credible enough to open the file. Warren looked up. I'll follow up on that, he said. I thought you might. She moved toward the exit. Mr. Gideon, the people who work in that building did something that most people in that position don't do. Make sure that's reflected in what comes next. She left. Warren was still standing in the hallway when Bria arrived at 2:07. Mrs. Ellard from 4B had driven her. Bria came through the hospital doors in her coat over her pajamas, and when she saw Warren standing there, she stopped 4 feet away. She looked at him, top to bottom, the inventory look of someone who needed to assess quickly and accurately. She's okay, he said. Bruised cheekbone, 2 closures on her lip, bruised ribs. Nothing that requires him more than tonight. Bria breathed, one long, controlled exhale. Which room? 3. They're finishing up. She moved toward room 3, then stopped, turned back. You didn't leave, she said. I was here when she came in. That's not what I mean. Bria looked at him with the direct attention of her mother in a younger face. She sent you 2 words, and you got out of the car. Yes. Why? Warren thought about the honest answer, not the impressive one, because she had been doing the right thing alone for 3 weeks. And I wasn't going to let her keep doing it alone. Bria looked at him for a moment, the inventory look completing itself. Okay, she said. That's enough for now. She went to room 3. Warren sat back down in the plastic chair. Let the hallway do its quiet, fluorescent, institutional thing around him. He thought about Foss's question. How did you know? The hands. The specific detail that had broken through 15 minutes of believing the wrong thing. He thought about sitting in his New York penthouse 11 days ago reading a number, 69%, and deciding that number meant something he couldn't see from that distance. He had arrived. He had not arrived too late. This time, the exam room door opened at 3:20. Renata came out in the clothes she had gone in with, minus the apron. 2 butterfly closures on her lip, a bruise across her left cheekbone in the early colors, purple and yellow-green at the edges. She moved with the slight, careful deliberateness of someone whose ribs were reminding her they existed. She looked at him, then past him, looking for Bria. She went in about 20 minutes ago, Warren said. She said to tell you she's not leaving until the doctor finishes the paperwork. Something crossed Renata's face. Not surprise. Recognition. That's Bria, she said. They stood in the hallway, the fluorescent light doing what it did, which was illuminate everything without flattering anything. You got out of the car, she said. I lasted 9 dalsescents. I know. I heard you come in through the dock. I knew you were there about 20 seconds before Conrad did. He looked at her. You didn't show it. Showing it would have given you away. She met his eyes. I needed Conrad looking at me, not at the door. He absorbed that. The calculations she had been running while sitting in that chair, while Conrad was talking, while the 2 men were standing near the door, she had heard Warren coming, and had kept Conrad's attention on herself so Warren could get into position. Not a victim waiting to be found, a person running a parallel operation from a chair. "You knew I would come," he said. She looked at him for a moment, something settling in her expression. "I knew you wouldn't stay in the car." "How?" "Because of the way you got off your stool the afternoon Opaline dropped the tray. You didn't think about it. You just moved. That's who you are when the situation requires something of you." She paused. "You move." Brya appeared from room 3. She was carrying Renata's jacket over one arm because of course she was. She looked at both of them, made a private assessment, held the jacket out to Renata, and then held the door for her mother, with the composure of someone who had decided how the next few minutes should go and was implementing that decision. "Let's go home," Brya said. Not a question, a resolution. They walked out of Grady Memorial Hospital at 3:41 in the morning into an Atlanta night that was cold and clear and entirely indifferent to what had just happened inside it, which was fine. The city didn't need to know. Some things were complete without an audience. What happened next was the work. And work, in Warren's experience, was never the dramatic part. The dramatic part was the night in the alley, the conversation in the park, the moment in the office when Conrad had looked at the phone screen and understood that his calculation had failed him. The work was what came after, sweeter, longer, more consequential. Agent Foss's team completed the takedown of the remaining 3 distribution points within 36 hours. The network Conrad had built across restaurant supply chains in the Southeast had involved 11 locations in 4 states, 14 arrests total. The merchandise recovered represented 3 separate organized retail theft operations whose connection to the restaurant industry had made them difficult to trace. Conrad Spiller was charged with federal wire fraud, organized merchandise trafficking, extortion, and assault. His attorney was good. The case against him was better. 9 months of FBI groundwork combined with Renata's documentation, Douglas's financial audit, and the coordinated multi-location takedown produced a file that could not be managed away. Trace Bellamy cooperated with investigators within 48 hours. He was the kind of person who had told himself for 18 months that what they were doing was not as serious as it looked from outside. The problem with that particular conversation was that you could only sustain it until you couldn't anymore. He cooperated because cooperation was the only remaining door that opened onto anything he could live with. The previous cases: 8 restaurant owners across 13 years. 3 had their records cleared within the first 6 months. 2 received financial settlements from a civil suit that Warren's legal team helped facilitate. The Louisville case was reopened and its surviving records were re-examined. The Nashville case remained the hardest part of the story. Marcus Webb had been 44 years old. He had built 1 restaurant in 11 years. He had not had the resources to fight what Conrad's operation had constructed against him, and he had sold at a loss, and 8 months later he was not there anymore to receive what came after. Warren thought about Marcus Webb on certain mornings, not with the guilt that had once attached itself to Clara, the guilt of too late, of not having paid attention when attention was still useful. That guilt was a different shape. This was something else, something colder. The recognition that systems permitted what systems permitted, and that the people with the resources to change systems had an obligation that most of them never fully acknowledged. He thought about Clara, too. He always thought about Clara eventually. But the shape of it had changed. He had come to Atlanta because he couldn't arrive too late again, and he hadn't. Not this time. Not for Renata. Not for Opaline. Not for Danny or Sam or Gloria or the 19 other people who had been working inside Conrad's operation and had deserved better from the system they were part of. Clara had taught him what too late felt like. Atlanta had taught him what not too late required. Both things were true. Both mattered. He held them side by side and got back to work. He started with the reporting structure. The changes to Gideon Hospitality Group were substantial and implemented starting the following month. An independent reporting line, completely separated from regional management, accessible to every employee at every location, anonymous. Reviewed by an external ethics board that reported directly to Warren and to no one beneath him in the management chain. The management contracts were revised. Regional managers no longer had access to the audit threshold parameters. Cross-location financial review happened monthly rather than quarterly, conducted by a rotating team rather than one permanently assigned to a single location. Employee equity, small percentages, but real. Every full-time employee after 1 year received a stake in the location's annual performance, and Opaline. He had gone to her 3 weeks after the arrests. A quiet Tuesday morning, the diner between rushes. He sat at the counter, and she poured coffee without being asked, which was her way of saying she already knew this was a real conversation. He asked her carefully about the letter to the FBI. She poured the coffee, set the pot down, looked at the surface of the counter for a moment. "I went 3 months before you came," she said. "I didn't know if it would do anything." I'd been watching that man operate for 8 months, and I was 64 years old, and I had run out of patience for believing that waiting was the responsible choice. "Why didn't you say anything when I came in?" "Because by the time I knew who you were, Renata had already made her move." She looked at him steadily. "She had better evidence than I did. She had access I didn't. What I sent was enough to open a door. What she built was what walked through it." Warren was quiet for a moment. "What made you send it?" After 8 months of saying nothing, Opaline considered the question, not quickly. "I thought about the people who had worked here before Conrad came," she said. "The ones who had left because they couldn't stand it anymore. I thought about a prep cook named Alvin, who had worked here 11 years and left in March without saying goodbye to anyone because he was too ashamed of being scared. She picked up a cloth, wiped the counter. I thought, Alvin shouldn't have had to carry that shame. That wasn't his to carry. And I had been standing here letting him carry it." She set the cloth down. "So, I wrote the letter." Warren looked at her. "I want to create a role," he said, "employee welfare representative for this location. It would formalize what you already do, what you have always done. Make it official, put it on the org chart with its own salary and its own reporting line to the ethics board." Opaline looked at him for a long moment, the assessment of someone who had seen enough promises dissolve to take none of them on faith. "It's about time," she said. And then she went back to the coffee because a cup at the far end of the counter was getting low. Renata started at the corporate office on a Monday in February. She had interviewed with Douglas Wren on the preceding Thursday. Warren had arranged the interview and then removed himself from the process entirely, which had required more conscious effort than he had expected. Douglas had interviewed her for 50 minutes. He had given her a sample financial model with 3 embedded errors of varying subtlety. She had found all 3 in 18 minutes and had then asked, unprompted, about a fourth thing that was not an error but was an inefficiency that suggested a modeling assumption worth revisiting. Douglas had called Warren that afternoon. "She starts Monday," he said. "I thought you'd want time to. She starts Monday." She started Monday. Her schedule was Tuesday evenings, Thursday evenings, and Saturday mornings at Georgia State. The financial analysis coursework that she had walked away from 7 years ago for reasons that had been real and necessary, and that she was not going to spend time regretting. She approached the gap in her education the way she approached the blue notebook, methodically, 1 page at a time. The work was hard in places. She sat with the hard places rather than moving around them. 3 weeks into the role, she submitted a proposal to Douglas, a cross-location employee feedback system. Quarterly, anonymous, with aggregate reporting that went directly to Warren. She had written it on a Thursday night after her class, at the kitchen table with Bria's textbooks on one side and her own on the other. Douglas had reviewed it on a Friday afternoon and sent Warren a 2-line email. "Review the Carter proposal when you have a chance. I should have thought of this 2 years ago." Warren had read it on Saturday morning and felt the particular combination of pride and humility that arrived when someone showed you clearly how much better things could be. He called her. She was at the library at Georgia State. "The proposal," he said. "I know it's outside my current job description. Douglas wants to implement it across all 47 locations by Q3. A pause. Brief. That's faster than I expected. He's annoyed he didn't think of it first. That's always when Douglas moves fastest." Warren paused. "It's a good piece of work, Renata." "It's a logical piece of work." The data pointed toward it. "Those are often the same thing." She was quiet for a moment. He could hear the ambient sound of the library around her, pages, the hum of climate control, the particular hush of people engaged with information. "I'm going to be here another 2 hours," she said. "If you wanted to have coffee after." "Not a work coffee," he said. He had been building toward this sentence for 3 weeks, and he was going to say it directly. "I mean, not about work." Another pause. Longer. "There's a place on Ponce de Leon," she said. "Good coffee, neutral ground. 7 o'clock? 7 o'clock." He put the phone down, looked at the wall of his office for a moment. Then he got back to work. Because there was still work to do and the work mattered, and that was not going to change, and he didn't want it to. Bria's acceptance to Emory University arrived in March, full merit scholarship. Intended major, public policy with a minor in ethics. The letter came on a Thursday while Renata was at the office. Bria sent a photo of it as a text. No caption, just the image. Renata read it at her desk and then set her phone face down and looked at her office wall for 60 seconds because she needed 60 seconds and she was going to take them. Then she called Bria. Mom, I'm so proud of you I don't have a word for it. You just used 12 words? I'm working with limited resources. I've been at this desk since 8. Bria laughed. The full version, the one that sounded like her grandfather. She called Warren after she called Bria. It was not a professional call. They had been having calls that were not professional calls for about 6 weeks by then, and they had arrived at them gradually, the way you arrived at things that were worth doing. Neither of them had rushed it. Bria had been very clear that rushing was not what the situation called for, a position she had stated directly to Warren on the occasion of their second dinner, which he had found entirely reasonable and had said so. When Renata called and told him about the scholarship, he said, "She's going to run something important someday." "She's going to run several important things," Renata said, in sequence. "How do you feel?" She thought about the true answer, not the easy one. "Like I can breathe," she said. "Like something I've been carrying has put itself down. The renovations had kept everything worth keeping. The original bones of the building, the arched windows, the checkered floor, the chrome counter stools. Sam's kitchen, which had been upgraded with equipment Sam had selected himself and been characteristically particular about. The framed photographs of Atlanta's history on the walls, cleaned and releveled and joined now by something new. Photographs of the staff. Not the posed corporate headshot kind. Photographs taken on regular days, people in motion, doing the work. Opaline pouring coffee, caught at the precise angle where the light through the east window turned the steam visible. Sam at the prep counter at 6 in the morning, not aware the camera was there. Danny, who had been promoted to shift supervisor in February, explaining something to the new hire at the service station, his hands making the same expressive motion he always used when he was trying to help someone understand. Underneath each photograph, a name, a number of years, a line of text. Not a job title, a line that meant something. Opaline's photograph was the one nearest the door, the frame positioned at eye level so it was the first thing you saw when you came in. Her expression in the photograph was the expression of someone who had been asked to hold still and had agreed to it under active protest. 38 years beneath her name. And below that, the line Warren had added without telling her first. Small things add up. She had complained about it for exactly 4 minutes the day the frames went up. Said it was sentimental, said she didn't need her words on a wall. Said whoever had authorized this had too much time on their hands. Then she had gone back to the coffee because a cup at the far end of the counter was getting low. Warren arrived at the diner at 8:45 on the Saturday morning in April, not to inspect. Not to review numbers or meet with Marcus, the new regional manager, a man of 40 who had come from the Nashville location and who approached the job with the understanding that his primary obligation was to the people under him, not the numbers above him. Warren arrived because he wanted to be there. He sat in booth 2. His regular place since the second morning. The corner booth belonged to the version of himself who had arrived not knowing what he would find. He didn't need to be that version anymore. Opaline appeared with coffee before he had finished settling in. Black, without being asked. She had decided months ago that this was his order, and she was not entertaining alternatives. "Morning," she said. "Morning. How's the new hire?" Talkative. She refilled the sugar dispenser at the end of the table. "But she listens, that's the part that matters. You're training her? I'm working near her. She's learning things. Whether she's being trained is her business." She moved back toward the counter. Warren watched her go. He had never confirmed the letter directly with her, had not asked her to confirm it. The thing about Opaline was that she had done what she had done, and she did not require acknowledgement for it. The acknowledgement was in the photograph on the wall and the role on the org chart and the fact that the building she had worked in for 38 years was still standing and run correctly. That was the acknowledgement. Everything else was surplus. Renata arrived at 9. She came through the front door in dark jeans and a jacket the color of old copper. Her hair down. The bruise on her cheekbone had resolved weeks ago into nothing visible. She moved through the diner with the ease of someone who knew every corner of a place well enough not to have to think about navigating it. She slid into the booth across from him. Opaline appeared without being summoned, set a second coffee down, and left again in the way of someone who had no interest in the dynamics of the situation, and also every interest in the dynamics of the situation. They sat with the coffees for a moment. The morning light came through the front windows and lay in strips across the table between them. "Douglas sent the Q1 numbers," Renata said. "I saw them yesterday. Revenue up 19%. You're not going to react to that. I'm reacting internally. She looked at him over her coffee. The feedback system launches across all locations next month. Marcus has been briefing the staff on how it works. 2 employees already used the anonymous line to flag a scheduling conflict they'd been sitting with for 2 months. She paused. A scheduling conflict. Not a crisis. Not a crime. Something ordinary that was making their lives harder that they now had a way to say. That's the point. I know. I'm just saying it out loud because I want to hear how it sounds. How does it sound? She thought about it, genuinely, like something that should have existed before. He looked at her across the table. The morning light was doing what morning light did in this building, warm and specific, the kind that revealed rather than flattered. He had been looking for the right way to say the thing he wanted to say for several weeks. He had decided, sometime in the past few days, that there was no right way. There was only the honest way. I want to tell you something, he said. That has nothing to do with the numbers or the feedback system or anything professional. She set her coffee down, gave him the full attention she gave to things that mattered. The last 6 months have been the most purposeful I can remember, he said. Not because of the case or the investigation or the changes we've made. Those things are real and they matter. But the reason the last 6 months have been what they've been is you specifically. He said it without hedging, without the social softening that made difficult things easier to say, but less true in the saying. Because you showed me what it meant to actually pay attention to the people around you and what they were carrying. I had built something I thought was good, and I had stopped looking closely enough to see how it was actually working. You had been looking the whole time. Renata was quiet. Processing, not performing processing, actually doing it. I've been thinking about you differently than professionally since sometime in November, he continued. I've been waiting to say it until we were past the immediate weight of everything. We're past it now. So I'm saying it. She looked at him for a moment. Outside the window, Atlanta's Saturday morning was in full operation. A woman with a stroller navigating the sidewalk gap where the pavement lifted. A man on a bicycle with a basket full of something he was delivering somewhere. 2 older men at the bus stop, deep in the kind of conversation that had clearly been ongoing for years. I've been thinking about you differently than professionally since November, too, Renata said. She said it plainly, the way she said everything that was true. And I've been waiting until it felt like we were standing on ground that belonged to us and not to everything that happened. Does it feel like that now? She looked around the diner, at Opaline at the counter, at Marcus visible through the kitchen pass-through, at the photographs on the wall, at the table where they were sitting, in the building where everything had started, which had been remade without losing what it had always been. Yes, she said. It feels like that now. Warren picked up his coffee. She picked up hers. I should tell you, he said, that Bria asked me 3 weeks ago what my intentions were. Renata closed her eyes briefly. She didn't. She did, very directly. In the parking lot after our second dinner while you were getting your jacket. What did you tell her? That they were serious and long-term, and that I understood her mother was not a person who did anything casually, and that I had no interest in casual. Renata looked at him. And she said, good. Then she got in the car. Renata was quiet for a moment. Then she said, she told me you passed. She told me I had potential, which I understand is different. With Bria it is, yes. Opaline materialized from the direction of the counter. Refilled both coffees with the economy of someone who had done this 38 years and had opinions about everything and expressed them selectively. She looked at the 2 of them, at the table, at the coffees, at whatever was visible in the space between the 2 people sitting across from each other in the morning light. She said, first dates should be neutral ground. You should have used somewhere else. Renata looked at her. This is not a first date. I know, Opaline said. I'm saying the first one should have been neutral ground. This one you can have here. She set the coffee pot down. You've earned the right to sit in this building and be happy in it. She went back to the counter, to the regular at the 3rd stool, to the cup that needed filling, and the morning that needed doing, and the 38 years of small, faithful things that had accumulated into something no single dramatic gesture could have built. Warren looked at Renata. She was looking at Opaline. Her expression was the expression of someone who understood fully what they were looking at, not sentiments. Something more durable than sentiment. The recognition that ordinary faithfulness sustained long enough became its own kind of foundation. She sent the letter, Renata said quietly. Not a question. 3 months before I walked in. Renata was quiet for a moment, then, I know. I've known since January. I didn't ask her about it directly. I didn't need to. She paused. She did what she could do, and that's all any of us did. Warren looked at Opaline at the counter. The silver hair, the efficient hands, the photograph on the wall by the door where the light caught correctly every morning. Small things add up. 38 years of showing up, of noticing, of pouring coffee for people who needed it, and holding still when the wrong person walked through, and finally, when the patience for waiting had run all the way out, writing something down and putting it in an envelope and walking to a mailbox on a weekday afternoon and dropping it in. No announcement, no witness, no certainty that it would lead anywhere. Just the thing she could do. Done. And here they were. Warren picked up his coffee. Renata picked up hers. Outside Atlanta's Saturday kept going, ordinary and continuous, full of people carrying things no one else could see, full of small decisions made in private that added up over time into something larger than any single moment. The diner filled around them. Sam's kitchen was running. The smell of something made from scratch coming through the pass-through, the way it always did, the way it had for 22 years, because that was the thing Sam knew how to do and no one had been able to take it from him, and now no one was going to try. The morning went on, and it was enough. It was everything.